How did a city that was once supposed to host 700,000 residents and be the next big ultra-luxury metropolis end up like this? As an eerie ghost town with a population roughly the same as the number of people who attend a high school football game. The answer tells a cautionary tale about how poor planning, geopolitical tensions, and gross overestimations can ruin grand ambitions. In this video, we'll explore the mystery that is Malaysia's Forest City. Malaysia's Forest City was an idea conceived in 2014 not by a local organization, but by a Chinese real estate company called Country Garden. The idea was to build an eco-friendly city with gleaming skyscrapers, ultra-luxury condos, a golf course, a water park, and several bars and restaurants. This megaproject would require them to create 4 artificial islands along Malaysia's southern Johor state coast, in the Singapore Strait. With these ambitious plans, developers hope to attract high net worth individuals and tourists, particularly from China, who would be drawn by the promise of owning a holiday home a stone's throw from Singapore. At the same time, Country Garden was promising to build a city of the future, with talk of a massive interconnected network of rooftop parks, multiple technology and biotech research facilities, and measures to preserve the region's delicate ecosystem. So, in 2014, Country Garden went on an unprecedented construction frenzy. It pledged a staggering $100 billion to build a city with a population roughly that of Frankfurt and bigger than major cities like Atlanta. A year later, interest peaked. When sales opened in 2015, thousands of buyers rushed to book still incomplete apartments, and busloads of potential Chinese buyers were dropped on one of the islands every single day. To encourage more people to move, there was also a program that offered a select few who bought flats in China to get one for free in Forest City. Unfortunately for Country Garden, it didn't take too long for its grand vision to run into a series of obstacles that it had failed to anticipate. The first issue was geopolitical. I won't get too much into it, but the gist of it is that in 2014, when the project was announced, it had the blessing of the then Sultan of the Johor state. Then, a massive corruption scandal broke out and the government changed hands. The man who took over as Prime Minister, 93-year-old Mahathir Mohamad, wasn't the biggest fan of the project, as he was skeptical about rising Chinese influence in the country. In 2018, he announced that the country wouldn't give out visas to outsiders who bought property in Forest City, or what he called a city built for foreigners. The rule was challenged soon after, but not before sales took a hit. Meanwhile, over in China, the government imposed a capital control that prevented its citizens from moving more than $50,000 out of the country in a year. With a minimum price of a Forest City home approximately $75,000, this was obviously not feasible. Many others have complained that the city was way out of touch with the actual housing needs of regular Malaysians. With 2-bedroom apartments starting at about $165,000, the homes were too steep for the typical Malaysian household, but cheap compared to Shanghai or Beijing, proving that the plan was to cater to Chinese tourists all along. Then in 2020, the pandemic hit, effectively ending movement from China as well. A few years later, in 2023, Moody's downgraded Country Garden's rating into junk territory, raising questions on whether it could even afford to complete the project. So we get to the Forest City of today, a largely abandoned ghost town on the edge of the Straits of Johor. Entire apartment towers lie empty, while the few residents who have moved in report feeling isolated and disconnected. On some days, the only things you'll find at the beach are stray dogs, empty alcohol bottles, and a wide staircase that leads to nowhere. There are no water sport enthusiasts, beach lovers, or fisher folk. Not that any of this matters since crocodiles have taken over large parts of the coast and made swimming out of the question. It's hard to find official population figures, but estimates suggest that there are only about 9,000 people currently living in Forest City, a tiny fraction of the 700,000 it had originally planned to host. Construction sites have now been abandoned, and only a small portion of the buildings have been completed. Houses are put up for sale at massive discounts, even as the city's former residents speak to journalists with the same relief they would as if they had just escaped North Korea. So, what does the future hold for this spooky 1,380 hectares of unoccupied land? Experts believe that without a major rethinking of strategy, Forest City is unlikely to ever reach the scale its creators had initially hoped for. Some have suggested that Country Garden should pivot away from courting foreign investors and instead focus on making the city more livable and affordable for ordinary Malaysians. This could involve building more middle-income housing, improving public transportation links, and investing in community amenities like schools and hospitals, basically building a regular city. But even with challenges coming in from every corner, Country Garden seems confident that the project will see success in the long term. And indeed, the fact that the Malaysian government has changed hands once again, this time into one that's in favor of the project, has potentially given the company and project a much-needed lifeline. Malaysia's new Prime Minister recently announced that the region would be declared as a special financial zone. This means that the residents will be allowed multiple entry visas, a flat income tax rate of 15%, and fast-track entry if they work in Singapore. Meanwhile, the new Sultan of Johor, who also supports the project, announced that he plans to revive a proposed high-speed rail project, linking Forest City to Kuala Lumpur and Singapore. Are these moves going to be enough to save the city? Only time will tell.